of the SOAR process we've been using to read this novel. So the S is summarize, the O, observe, the A, analyze. It's the R that we're going to focus on today, which is the response. And what you're going to be doing in this on-demand writing is to determine how closely the worldview presented in the text aligns with or corresponds to a biblical view of the world, right? So you're going to look at some worldview within the novel that's presented within the novel and how closely or how far away that aligns with your understanding of a biblical view of the world. Ultimately, you're going to make a stand. And the stand is going to be one of three things. You're either going to receive that worldview, you're going to reject that worldview, or you're going to redeem that worldview. Now, Mr. Roff, what do those terms mean? What does it mean to receive, reject, or redeem? How would I make that determination? Well, that's a great question. And of course, it's the next slide that's going to come up, right? If you're going to receive this worldview, well, what you're saying is that this view of the world is categorically good and it aligns perfectly with a biblical understanding. If you're going to make the second choice to reject the worldview, then what you're saying is that it's the opposite. It's categorically bad. It is broken beyond repair. We can't fix it at all. Finally, if you're going to make the third choice to redeem, then you can make this worldview good and biblical with changes or alterations, right? So you can do a few things to kind of shave off the bad things of this view in order to make it something that we would want to receive. So that's going to be essentially your thinking, your focus for this particular assignment. Now, there's really going to be two parts of breaking this down, okay? And I'll show you this all in a sample answer that I've created and also uploaded on Google Classroom for you. So we're going to take a look at that sample response here in a moment. But really, in your response, you're going to have to conduct some literary analysis. You're going to have to look at the text, okay? You can't run away from the story just because we're looking at big picture ideas of worldviews. And then the second part is that personal reflective response where you receive, reject, or redeem. So keep that in mind. And you're going to see this very clearly in my sample answer. There's going to be an analyze part where I'm looking at the text, and there's going to be a part where I'm thinking about the worldviews presented, which is that personal reflective response. And I'll even put a note here. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to draw. Let's try again. World view. Right. Okay, let's jump over to the sample answer. So if you have it, you can pull it up, but I am going to show it to you on the screen here. Okay, this sample response comes from the Call of the Wild. I didn't want to steal any of your great ideas from The Moon is Down. And this is actually an on-demand assignment we did with Call of the Wild chapters 1 through 3. So the prompt says this: in chapters 1 through 3 of Call of the Wild, the main character Buck must adapt to his surroundings in order to survive. Maybe you've forgotten about that book, but if you did, just, think back to chapters 1 through 3, Buck has to adapt. How are these changes beneficial or harmful to Buck through these first chapters? Okay, that's really question number 1, right, of this prompt. That's the literary analysis part, right? That's the literary analysis part. The second question, how does Jack London use these adaptations to suggest a larger worldview through the text? Well, that's going to be obviously the worldview portion. That's where you're going to either receive, reject, or redeem. Let me show you how I set that up in my answer. Okay, and I'm going to go through the answer somewhat quickly, but I'll highlight a few key parts. It starts off, despite helping Buck survive, his many physical and behavioral adaptations ultimately harm Buck, right? So I answer the question, right? They harm Buck as an individual, right? The primary cause of this harm stems from the manner in which Buck must learn the lessons. First, he's brutally beaten into submission. Skipping a little bit later, while Buck learns that a man with a club is a lawgiver, a master to be obeyed. Notice how I integrate some textual evidence, right, in my answer. The man with the red sweater reinforces the lesson through violence. The second, even more disturbing change is wrought within Buck when it occurs when he enters the amoral environment of the Klondike, right? Buck's going to pieces of his moral nature, which can be witnessed in the theft of food, right, and the merciless murder of Spitz, alters Buck from a good and loving pet. Now he is nothing more than a highly trained killer. Now you might be thinking, wow, Mr. Roff, that's great. That focuses heavily on question number 1. And you'd be right. That's my literary analysis portion, right? So I've answered that question. How are these changes beneficial or harmful to Buck through the first 3 chapters? I've given textual support, right? And I've analyzed that textual support. So certainly this is a CSA form, right? The second portion, which is in green here, now this is when I transition And I'm talking now about the worldview. And it's very important to note that in this response, and I'm going to change highlighter colors so that it doesn't clash too badly, is that I name a worldview in my claim that Jack London supports. And you don't have to have any fancy philosophical language here, right? You can just simply name a basic worldview that we would be familiar with. Let me just explain that. So ultimately, I think Jack London's text argues too strongly for this amoral survival of the fittest worldview. Now, that's a term you might know from your science class, from your biology class. That didn't even come up necessarily in English, but you should be familiar with that being a worldview, right? Survival of the fittest. Okay, that's part of the claim. In fact, we must reject a survival of the fittest mindset on a number of levels. Okay, so notice here in this claim, and I'll put a C there for claim, I'm either naming if I'm going to receive, reject, or redeem this particular worldview. In this case, I'm saying reject. Okay, and then I go into support, right? I go into support. And the support comes from the idea of how does this go against, in my case, a biblical view of the person, right? So the first reason that I'm giving for this particular claim is because it's got a lack of value on human life. So that's my support number one, right? And then if I go a little further, right, one's worth and value have nothing to do with one's overall utility. The other area of discomfort stems from the situational subjective morality. So that's going to be my support number two, right? And those are reasons not from the text necessarily, right? Not directly quoted from the text that I'm using to support my claim. If I would receive it, I would explain why this worldview can be taken in its entirety. And if I was going to say this needs to be redeemed, then I would look at how would I fix it, right? So just to quickly review, hopefully the highlighting helps. The first part, how are these changes beneficial or harmful to Buck through the first chapters, is what's in blue. I'm analyzing the text through a literary perspective, all right? Then I transition, and this is the part that's in green. The transition into, okay, well, how would I receive, reject, or redeem the worldview that's presented? And of course, I name the worldview, all right? Hopefully you can see that broken down. This sample answer will be posted onto our classroom page. And I should probably just leave the highlighting in here, but if I forget, don't forget, you can go back and watch the video again. All right, let's head now to the assignment itself. Okay, so this is the assignment that you're going to see on Classroom. It says, for your selected prompt, you'll write for 20 minutes addressing, oops, that's the wrong thing. Sorry about that. I didn't want to cross out those instructions. I want to highlight, write for 20 minutes addressing the following topics. All right, and so the first part is the literary analysis. The second part is receive, reject, redeem. Now, I've given you two prompts to choose from. You're going to choose one to write about. You don't have to write about both. Okay, why does Alex Morden kill Captain Bentic? Right? And then how should we respond to Alex's view of resistance against an unjust authority? If you're setting this up by paragraph, this would be paragraph 1, and this would be paragraph 2. This would be the analysis, and this would be the receive, reject, or redeem portion, right? That second question. The second prompt that you can choose from, you don't have to do both, you're just picking one prompt, is about Colonel Lancer, right? So why does Colonel Lancer execute Alex for killing Bentic? And then how should we respond to Lancer's view of justice? Right? Again, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, analysis and response. On the sheet, it gives you a place to type. Okay, so you're actually going to write your answer here. Okay, you type your answer there. I didn't give you any lines. I figured you don't need those because you're going to be typing this. And then at the very bottom is a rubric, right? So this is how I'm going to assess your answers. One thing I want to remind you about on this rubric, okay, you don't need to, there's no editing, right? You don't have to revise. You don't need to worry about punctuation, grammar, spelling. I'm not grading you on those things. You're getting your thoughts out on the paper. Okay, if you look back at my sample response, you're probably going to notice there might be some grammatical mistakes or some places where I spelled something wrong. I literally hand wrote this out as a sample, okay? And you can look at it